which made it a little more challenging to ride.
And I've just been recorded. Okay, hope it's right.
Sorry.
First item to talk about is our president, Tom Schilke, and a friend from PRAS, Scott Garrett, are celebrating Tom's birthday, which is tomorrow, probably, in Ecuador. They're down in Ecuador, so I'm filling in them tonight, and I'm Craig Rash, and I'd like to welcome you again. They're in the Ecuador and Galapagos Islands, and when they get back, we can expect a program from them. How's that? The first item to talk about again is the recent retirement of Connie Sloboda. She was a developmental coordinator for the Hartman Nature Center here in Cedar Falls, and she retired at the beginning of this year, and she will continue to be our director, coordinator, expert on PRAS red tail. So welcome back. Connie. Francis Moore is going to report to us about the balance of, much like what's going on with our State of the Union address tonight. Francis is going to give us an idea about what the state of our PRAS organization is in his treasurer's report. Francis, you're up.
Okay. At the present time, we have $8,262.53 in our checking and savings accounts. And we have 405 members right now. And our bird feed fund is a negative 454.41.
Thanks, Francis.
Yep.
Francis is going to, well, the Christmas bird count, as I understand it, has been going on for about 125 years in the nation. And I was just reading about that this morning. And he's going to report that results of our Bremer County, well, of our bird counting activities in about maybe 7 or 8 locations, but mainly Blackhawk County and Bremer County in next month's red tape. So
Greg?
Yeah.
We had 60 species on the Bremer County count and 68 species on the Cedar Falls Waterloo count.
Great.
60 Bremer.
60 on Bremer County and 68 on Cedar Falls Waterloo.
One other item that took place, we changed the date because of weather conditions to the 28th in Bremer County, and the Siefkins, Darren and Janine, offered and conducted a luncheon, which was a really warm luncheon at their home on the 28th, and we certainly appreciate that and thank them for doing that. Hopefully that starts a precedence for us in the future. Thanks again, Darren and Janine. We continue to request money for supporting the bird feeding activities that are taking place in our area, and we need volunteers to assist Tom Moon in heading up this activity. Tom's going to make a few comments about that, but I'm just putting in a plug for our bird feeding stations, and Tom, if you'll elaborate on that, I appreciate it. Tom Moon, you have your
Mike muted.
Yeah, I had to unmute myself. Yeah, we have put them up since November and have had really nice success as far as birds coming to it. They've really been eating the snot out of it. I know we asked for volunteers, but it is a little difficult to feed them. One, you got to have a ladder, or we have a ladder out there, but you'd have to get it out of the bin and then set it up. So I'll say not if you're capable, that's fine. But sometimes it's a little dangerous. Sometimes you want two people, one to sturdy the ladder and help hand the feed to you. But otherwise, my wife and I, Linda, will continue on feeding them. It's no big deal. We live close enough. It's not that big of a deal. What I would like more than anything is more funds. Obviously, we're in the negative, and if we get too far in the negative, basically we won't feed quite as many birds, or the bird feeders won't be full all the time. We'll have to go back a little bit to keep up with what we do have. Because we do not just the Canfield birds, but we do the bird blind and a visitor center and the hospice. So we have a lot of seed going out that costs quite a bit of money anymore. And we have the volunteers that do pretty good about it, feeding it. So yeah, we got to always do the volunteer. You can get on the website and take down that information. And then we'll get back to you. And when we're going to go feed them, you can come out and kind of look to see if it's something that you really want to do or not. And we'll proceed from there. And that's about it.
Thanks, Tom. You've been doing a great job for us, and we're glad we've got that station.
We also are eventually going to get some signs up that do indicate a donation. We're in that process. It's not
Tom,
done yet, but we're getting there.
the signs have been ordered. They will be here after the 4th of February.
Oh, good.
Very good.
That'll hopefully help.
Those signs will incorporate a QR code for people to.
Right.
Okay.
I'm not too good at looking at things. I was gonna ask if there's people from outside of the locality, outside the state, that are viewing in right now. If they do, they sound out, but we've got a speaker tonight that's gonna help enlighten them on some interesting subjects on binoculars. In November, David Voights gave a program in our club dealing with constellations and the heavens. Last night, I had the opportunity to call Candace out in Wyoming, out in Cheyenne. She's out in Cheyenne, folks, and we were visiting, and I had pointed out that around 4 o'clock, you could go out in the evening and see a spectacular full moon, called the wolf moon by naturalists, but it was so bright last night. I hope you had a chance to see it, or we'll take time tonight or the next night. And it's fun, this time of year. There aren't any leaves on the trees or anything like that, where you can observe nature at its best. Oh, by the way, Chris went out yesterday and found a 4-point part of it.
5.
8 point. Part of it. Darren's, this ain't 8 points. This is 4. This is 1/2 of a point. But she found it last night out walking. Kind of early. We thought we'd be seeing an antler shed, but she found that. And last week we went down by Beaver in Cedar Falls and observed chickadees and nuthatches and other birds and downies feeding off of a gut pile. Deer had been dressed off in that area, and that was pretty interesting. Well, this time of the year, it's early enough, you can go for a walkabout. You can go out and see these acts of nature and listen to what's happening. And last night we were out and saw that full moon. And in talking with Candace, she saw a meteorite during that process. And she was elaborating on that. That's really neat. I encourage you to get out and do that. Just experience nature in its setting in the wintertime. Plans are being made for our board to confirm the year's activities. We'll meet in March to discuss more about that. But Laura Walters from Tallgrass Prairie Center will be our guest speaker for the February meeting. Next meeting will be in our church in Cedar Falls. And her topic is titled Seed Field Safari, featuring observing insects and other animals in prairie seed production. Should be, we've always had good presentations from people from the Tallgrass Prairie and look forward to that one too. I guess at this point, Candace is going to introduce our speaker. Our speakers.
I'm really pleased to welcome Michael and Diane Porter to our meeting tonight. I've had the pleasure of working with them, and they are expert birders. They are experts in the equipment that you need to be successful birding, and Michael's going to start out talking about optics and such. They have a small business out of Fairfield, Iowa called birdwatching.com. They have been active for over 20 years of participating in doing reviews of optics and such, and those were published in Birdwatchers Digest. Diane also has written articles on birds and birding for Birdwatchers Digest, and she produced a bi-monthly column in Backyard Bird News from 2004 to 2015. She has a wonderful blog called Gaia, My Gaia, that we have linked on our links page, and I'm just really delighted to welcome them. And so just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat. I'm going to be monitoring the chat, and we'll probably just take your question as you ask, so don't be shy. Oh, I have to give a plug too. I got both of my wonderful tripods and tripod heads from Diane and Michael, and they were experts in helping me figure out what is the best for me. And might I plug, a carbon fiber tripod will change your life. So thank you. Thank you for making it a lot easier for me to cart my scope around. I appreciate that. So another point of just point of order, I'm going to mute everybody just so we don't have a lot of background noise, except for the porters. So if you want to break in and ask a question, you can unmute yourself. All right. So without further ado, take it away, Michael.
So I'm going to start out with a story about how we got involved in birding and binoculars. We lived up in the early 60s, about 66, we moved up into the mountains in Santa Barbara. We moved up to a place called Flores Flats. There was no electricity, no phone service. The only utility we had was a propane tank. And we lived there for about 4 years, and we had a wonderful time living there. And in about 1968, we decided we needed a pair of binoculars, because Diane had looked through a pair of binoculars and saw that the bird looked enormously big. She's never seen something like that before. So we went down to the Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara And we went to this wonderful astronomical shop where a guy, he ground lenses. He was an amateur astronomer, and he also sold binoculars. And he was a wonderful expert. And we bought a little, I think we bought a little Bushnell binocular from him. And then we took it home and we didn't really like it much. We took it back and we traded in for a better one. And finally we ended up with this. This is the Zeiss Daylight. Dialight. It's an 8x32 roof prism binocular. It was one of the first roof prism binoculars ever made. And we found it was just wonderful. At the time, we had about $200 in the bank, and we paid $180 for this one. So that's how crazy we are about binoculars. When we started writing reviews for Birdwatchers Digest, that's when we really started learning about binoculars and how to test them. And I think you might be interested in some things that we found out about that. If you want to test, because we had to write these reviews, we had to be accurate. We had to be scientifically accurate. We wanted to, be sure that we weren't just making stuff up or just guessing about stuff. So we had to devise ways to actually measure what we were testing. And here's some tips about how you do it. You can't have any heat on. You can't have any, you have to be inside in a completely enclosed space with no heating air blowing or no AC vents going, because anything like that will utterly destroy your testing. What we did is that we put binoculars on a beanbag rest, two binoculars side by side on a very heavy tripod. And then we used a test chart like this. This test chart is micro printed. You can't see it. The printing is so fine, it's microscopic. It costs about $250. But that piece of paper. But this works too. If you want to have something to do simple testing, a dollar bill is really good because dollar bill, American currency is printed with a very fine detail. When we were testing high-end binoculars like Zeiss and Swarovski, we really had to put a doubler on the behind the eyepiece in order to really see the difference in resolution. And so when we had a tripod set up with a beanbag, and you could put two binoculars side by side, so you could just look at one and look at the other and really do a good A/B test. And if you had this chart, you could give it a numeral result. But you can't just test once. You have to test many times. In fact, we would even test on, because when you start testing binoculars, you get eye fatigue, and then your measurements are not accurate. So you have to rest a while. And we would usually take three days at least to test the binoculars, because we wanted to make sure that we had the same results every time. And we also organized the day when local birders came in and scored them. They didn't score them for optical quality, but they scored them for ergonomic things, like it's important. How easy is it to reach the focus knob? How smooth is the focusing? Will focusing work when you're wearing gloves? Do the strap lugs poke your hand? How pleasant is the fit and feel to the hand? That's why we had other people come in who have various size hands and different, actually setting back from the eyes. one time when we did that, we found out that Zeiss's Conquest binoculars didn't work for one of our testers because the eye cups weren't actually long enough for him to get the full field of view because his eyes were further backside. And we explained that to Zeiss and they fixed the eye cups a little bit later. It's amazing how they released a product without, understanding that that was the case. Now, the one thing, the things that we learned was that the really high-end binoculars have more resolution than your eyes can see. I mean, everybody has a different, detailed vision, but generally, if you look at a high-end binocular and you blow it up by putting a doubler on the back, you can go to the place where you certainly cannot see. It's already got more resolution than you could see with just not without doing something like that. So the things that we were interested with. So what's the reason why a person would buy a high-end binocular like a Swarovski binocular? Well, the main reason is survivability. I mean, you can another binocular might get pretty close to the resolution, but what you get with Swarovski when similar binoculars is something I would call survivability. If you're down the trail somewhere in Central America, like in Ecuador, and you drop your binoculars and they go out of alignment, that can ruin your trip. And you need really good waterproofing. And some of those binoculars, like the Swarovski binoculars, are built like a tank. Do you want to tell the story, Diane, about that?
I'll tell about Barb.
Okay.
I'll just move over here. We have a friend whose name is Barb, who lives on the West Coast, who had a pair of Swarovski EL binoculars. She didn't buy them from us. She'd already had them when we got to know her. But she told us the story of her ELs. She and her husband went on a trip to the Northwest Territories of Canada, and they parked their car and they hiked for most of the day, or at least for half of the day, with their lunch on their back. And they got way back. It was a beautiful place. They had a beautiful lake to look at. They sat down on a big rock and they had their lunch and they watched birds, and they just were so happy and so fulfilled. And they said, "This is great. We've got to come back here. And it's so great. We're going to come back again." And then they got up and went home. And when they got almost back to their car, they realized that Barb didn't have her binoculars. She had left them back on that rock. And they had to leave because they had to make their plane. They couldn't change their flight. They had to get on that plane and go home, and she had to leave her binoculars behind. So she was, of course, heartbroken. She said, "Well, we'll go back next year." But the next year, something happened. They couldn't go back. So another year went by, 2 years after their having made this trip. They went back to the same place, parked their car, hiked in. "There's the rock. That's where we sat." And they looked around, and about 15 feet from the rock was the binocular. She picked it up. She held it up to her eyes. The focus knob still was nice and smooth. They were still in alignment. Everything seemed fine, except that the covering, the armoring, was all ripped up where a bear had played with it for a while. Now, I don't know if it did, basketball or whatever it did with it, but it really, really ruined the covering. So when she got back home, she sent them into Swarovski. Swarovski checked them over and said, "Well, the waterproofing is intact. We didn't have to do anything to the alignment. They are in perfect condition except for the covering, which they were able to replace." But I thought that was pretty good that 2 years in the Northwest Territories through 2 winters that they had come through so nicely. So that is just a sample of how survivable Swarovski binoculars are.
So So now I want to switch to what I think is coming next for birding optics. The optical quality is about as good as it's going to get. I don't think that they're going to be able to increase the optics any more than they have already. So I think what's coming next is digital and AI viewing. Does anybody here have a digital camera? Well, if you own a digital camera, like we have a Canon R5, and when you look through it, the viewfinder, you're not looking at the optical, what the lenses are seeing. You're looking what the sensor is seeing. You're looking at the sensor information. That's what's presented to your eyes. And you can do things like there's a button on the camera which is a little magnifying glass, and if you push on that button, it'll magnify the image. So you blow up and you can see just part of the image, and if you do it again, it'll blow it up again. And it's just amazing that you can do this. And in fact, we've used this sometimes as a way of we didn't have a spotting scope with us. If we could mount the camera on a tripod and look across the creek and keep blowing it up, we could see things that we couldn't see with binoculars. So this is what's going to happen next, right? And one of the first things that happened like this is this guy. This is the Swarovski AX Visio. It's basically is it a 10 or
It's an EL 10 by 32.
it's a 10 by 32 binocular, but it's pretty clunky for a 10 by 32 binocular because it's got a lot of stuff inside it, you know. For example, you can this front here is a camera, and if you push this little button on the top, it'll take a picture of, you focus it and it'll take a picture of the bird, and then it'll analyze the picture. It'll look built into it is the Merlin database of all the birds, and it'll if you get it just right, it'll identify the bird for you. So that's kind of an interesting thing, but it's still kind of clunky, you know, and it'll also supposed to identify animals, but it's not quite as good like that. But it's a kind of a neat little thing to play with. If you know the birds in your local area, you really don't need something like this. But if you're going to another country or someplace like that, then you can do it. It has a GPS satellite sensor in it, so it can tell you, it knows what country you're in, what area of that country, and therefore it knows the birds that you're likely to see. So it can reduce the search of the Merlin database to just those birds to make it easier to use. So this is basically what's coming. What's coming next with binoculars is you're going to be just like the digital cameras. You're not going to be looking at what the optics show. You're going to be looking at the sensor, and that gives you tremendous advantages. You know, first of all, that image can be hooked up, can be connected with Merlin, so you can identify the birds, and then you can actually zoom your binoculars, because you can zoom just like you could zoom with the Canon RS camera.
Stabilized.
And not only that, but if you'll have a stabilized image. If you use any of the later iPhones and you turn it on video, the image gets completely stabilized, so it doesn't shake and move around. So, and the way it does it is it samples the image, and in real time, it matches, it looks at the next image, the next frame of the movie, and it just makes it come together and stay in the one, and look at once, stay stabilized. And so if that can happen, then that's going to happen in binoculars. That's the next thing that's coming. The other thing that's going to happen is that stuff is going to be vastly get faster and more miniaturized by AI technology. AI technology is the new thing happening, and it's going to be a tremendous revolution in all electronics, especially anything that has to do with a database. You'll be able to look through your binoculars, take a picture, and you'll be able to identify the bird. It'll automatically be able to help you transfer that sighting to eBird, and make and have your life list there. So, and you'll also be able to identify more than birds. You'll probably be able to identify plants and bees and butterflies too. Any questions about this?
This is Candace. I've got a question. So it sounds like it needs an internet connection then to be able to do that. And I'm in rural Wyoming right now. I'm north of Cheyenne.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't have good internet. And even in Waterloo, if I'm at Hickory Hills, just south of Waterloo, my eBird doesn't always work really well if I'm on the back trails. So is that going to be a sticky widget with this new technology?
Well,
eBird is built in.
yeah. Merlin is built into the binocular, not eBird, but Merlin is
Right.
built in. It's not separate. You don't need any outside connection to make that work.
Oh,
there's
I
no
understand now.
There's
Okay.
no reason why something like eBird can't be built in too.
Okay,
So it'll be
sure.
completely self-contained. And if you need a connection to the internet, satellite services will be available.
Okay, that makes sense.
But you won't necessarily need that for all your birding needs.
Mhm. So so the Swarovski model that you have has that capability right now. Are they the only vendor of optics that has that partnership with Cornell? Or do you know?
Merlin, yeah, they are, but um, um, the problem with Swarovski is that they're not they don't have the technology of the sensor. Like the camera, the manufacturers of cameras like Canon, Nikon, Sony, those people are experts with sensors. It's the sensor that is the key to doing this. The Swarovski Vizio it has a camera just built right in here. This is a camera, and it takes that picture. You're not actually, looking at a digital image. So it doesn't have the advantages of what's coming.
What does that Swarovski pair run in terms of cost?
Oh, I don't remember exactly, but it's a lot.
Yeah, it's almost $4,000.
Yeah, it's something around
Uh-huh.
$4,000.
Yeah. But this one particularly is one that we got as a demo from Swarovski. And if anybody's crazy enough to want one, we could give you a deal. Call Diane and talk.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for Michael? What is like your best recommendation for somebody wanting to upgrade their optics? Like let's say that they've just started birding, they've got their Bushnell or they've got their father's, older binoculars. Um, how would you outfit them?
Well, first thing we would do is that we ask what their budget is, right? Because and then we try to find the best thing for them in that budget range. And one of the binoculars we really the brand we really like to sell is Vortex, because Vortex has this incredible warranty. If you own a Vortex binocular of any kind and you break it and it's your fault, if you drop it on the ground, run over it with a car, destroy it, you send the pieces back into Vortex and they'll fix it for free or replace it. And that warranty, and there's no charge for doing it. And because they're in Wisconsin, you don't have to send it to Germany or something like that. There's nobody else that has that kind of warranty. And the warranty transfers with the binoculars. If you sell that or give that binocular to somebody else, they have that same warranty. So it's a wonderful thing, especially it's a wonderful thing for kids, or for
Scout troop.
bird clubs and things like that. Because you can, if people don't have binoculars, you can hand them out a binocular and without any worries.
Yes, I believe that the optics that we take for field trips are Vortex too. And I love my Leicas. My 8x42 Leicas are excellent, but I also have two pair of Vortex. I've got an 8x32 binoc that I take when I travel. So
Yeah.
if I lose it, I'm not losing the expense of my expensive Leicas.
Right.
And then
right.
I've got a 10x42 set of Vortex that I just got last fall to do hawk watch with. And the warranty is excellent. Sometimes the eye relief cup has busted on my 8x32s. And again, like you said, I sent them into Wisconsin. They're in Barnevelder, Wisconsin, just outside of Madison. And they sent me a whole new set of binoculars. So
Yeah. But also you can, if you want to go the high-end binoculars, I would recommend looking at Zeiss and Swarovski. Those are our favorite binoculars. Nikon makes a good binocular, but they're kind of legalistic with their warranty, and a lot of our customers complain about that. If you try to get something fixed, they say, "Show me your proof of purchase. Did you register the binocular?" Most companies, the other companies just don't bother with that stuff. It makes it very easy to get warranty service.
all right. Any other questions? Well, thank you, Michael.
Okay.
If anybody thinks of a question, pop it in the chat or pop on after Diane's talk and we'll get that answer
Or
too.
you can call us up and ask us.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I wanted to mention too that a number of years ago, I was one of the local birders that got to come help do the optics
did do
review.
that, yes.
Yeah, it was great fun. And I remember Tom Stone going, "Candace, you're in Birdwatchers Digest." And they had a picture of us gathered there at the Porters. And yep, there I was. But it was so interesting and just how detailed it was and how you had to rate and such. Yeah, it was a great opportunity so thank you for allowing us to participate in that. So oh, Wendy has a question. What size binoculars would you recommend for a birder?
Well, if you're a starting birder, maybe an 8x42. That's a standard size.
Mm-hmm.
If you're younger and you don't have any handshake, then a 10 power is maybe better. If you want to, have more magnification, you get more detail, but you also lose a lot of field of view, depending on where you're birding. You know, if you're birding and trying to find a bird up in the trees, then the field of view is very important for you.
Right. And I just thought of one last question. So sometimes I had planned to leave my 8x32s just in the car. So I always had my binoculars, but it gets really hot. It gets really cold. And I know that sometimes that can affect the optics. So your suggestions about that?
Well, I'd get a vortex for that reason.
Yeah, indeed,
If you
they
cook
are
it-
the
if you
vortex.
cook it, they'll fix it.
Right. Like
You
my
cook,
Leica.
we fix.
Also, it's really good to have a pocket binocular. You can have a full-size binocular, but sometimes you're going out the door and you say, "Oh, I don't want to carry this thing." But a pocket binocular, you always have it with you. And if you don't have a binocular with you, you know, you'll miss the bird. You never know driving down the road when you're going to see something you want to stop and look at.
Exactly. Okay. Any other questions? Well, we'll transition to Diane then,
Now
but
you're
thank
going
you
to see
so
the pretty
much.
stuff.
Now, how do we do this, Michael?
Well, let's see. Now we're going to share screen, right?
Yes, sharing screen. And then I think we want this, and then we want to hit play, but where is it? You have to double click this first, I think. And then hit play. All right, good.
Can you guys see it?
There's a little bit of latency. So what we're seeing is,
I want to see if this works to go back. Yes, it does. There's the cover piece.
okay.
All
All
right.
that I'm seeing, Diane, is your Mac like file directory page.
Oh, no, that's not good. Maybe we're not sharing yet.
So, or sometimes you have to select on your share screen. There we go. Yep,
Now you got it?
I got it. Yeah,
All right.
looks
so that's good.
beautiful.
All right. So, got me
Perfect.
all scared there for a second.
Nope,
Okay.
we've got it.
So we're just going to enjoy some local citizens of Iowa for the next few minutes here. The birds, the wildflowers, and didn't really, I'm kind of sorry I didn't put in the turtles, but you have to limit it this a little bit here. So I wanted to talk about, why doesn't this work? Why don't I go forward?
Go play. You go play.
It's playing already. When I hit the forward button, it doesn't do anything. There it is. All right, that was the latency we were talking about. Okay, so I've always liked flowers, always wanted to grow flowers, but for most of my life, I kind of was doing, roses and delphiniums and lilies and irises and stuff, and I just didn't really realize that wildflowers counted. But a few years ago, I suddenly had my eyes opened to the marvelous wild native flowers that we have here in Iowa. And so, and I also started finding out how important they were to the whole chain of being. So I'm going to just show you some flowers and talk a little bit about who needs them and who uses them. And let's start with that blue violet that grows in the woods everywhere in the spring. I mean, it's such a humble little flower, but it's a pretty thing. But it's very, very important to certain creatures. And primarily, it's important to fritillary butterflies because it turns out that violets are the only plants that the fritillary butterflies can that their larvae can feed on. So the butterflies lay their eggs on the leaves of the plants, and then as soon as they hatch, the little caterpillars crawl down in the grass and they hide out there all day long, and then at night they get back up on the leaves and they eat them. And I hear people talk about violets like they were some kind of weed in the lawn. When I first started studying about violets, I Googled them and I found 50 pages about how to get rid of them, how you could poison them, dig them out, all the things you could do to get rid of these terrible weeds. But my goodness, if you want fritillary butterflies, you gotta love violets if their color isn't enough to do it for you. Another flower that's such a iconic flower of the prairie is the golden Alexander. It's a flower that most people never even get to see. You really have to go to a prairie to see it, but it grows in your garden. It looks a little bit like the wild parsnip, but not really if you look at it. But it's a member of the carrot family, and it's vital to many, many plants, and in particular to swallowtail butterflies. The black swallowtail, any butterfly can nectar on the plant, but really what counts is who can eat the leaves. Can you see my cursor if I move it here? Can you see my cursor? I don't
Yes,
get you. Oh, can you? Okay. So
yes.
here's a little hole in this leaf, all right? And here's another little hole in the leaf over here. So that means that this plant has been doing its job, and the butterflies larvae have been able to eat it. Very, very important because lots of things need to eat those larvae. The buckeye butterfly is very much of a generalist in that the adult butterfly can nectar on many, many flowers. The New England aster is one of its favorites. And I love it on that because to me, I see the purple of the aster in the eyes of the butterfly, and the colors seem to correspond quite nicely. But even though many different butterflies can eat the New England aster nectar, and um, and the buckeye butterfly can eat many different flowers' nectar, not everything can eat the leaves of every plant. But in order to get all of the things, all of the different caterpillars to have something to eat, you have to have many things in bloom and growing throughout the whole season, because the birds are going to need those caterpillars all year long. You can't have a week that there's no caterpillars in style. So you have to have a big variety of things in order to always have something in bloom for nectar and leaves that the caterpillars are going to be on in order for the birds to have something to feed their babies.
What's this picture of?
This is a picture of my garden. I don't have tea roses and delphiniums and most lilies anymore, though I do have the lily that's our native lily here in Iowa, the Michigan lily. Of course, the Iowa native lily would be called the Michigan lily. One of the nicest flowers that we have every place in the prairie is the wild bergamot. A lot of people call this bee balm, but there's really something else that's called bee balm, but it's the same thing. When people say bee balm, they usually mean wild bergamot, which is very much admired by many different kinds of butterflies, including the eastern swallowtail. It's a great source of nectar. This is kind of a nice thing, the sphinx moth. This particular one is the snowberry clearwing, which can be told from the other kind of sphinx moth that is about the same size, because this one has a black belly. And look at that crazy tail. And that curled up proboscis, which can probe down into the flower. Really, this flower is made to be fed on by something that can probe down into it like that, which most butterflies can. I was talking before about how lots of different butterflies can nectar on the flowers, but only certain ones can have the caterpillars eat the leaves. Well, the common milkweed, everyone is so aware now that the milkweeds are essential to the monarch butterflies. And they are, because the monarch butterflies can only raise their larvae on the leaves of the milkweed. But once the milkweed is in bloom, all the different butterflies are able to get nectar from it. On this one, I really kind of like this little guy down here. I think this is a soldier beetle who's flying in. And over here, there's another little creature. There's insects all over the milkweeds because they're luscious for nectar, and they provide an enormous amount of nectar. But this fritillary butterfly, if it laid its eggs on the leaves, those eggs might hatch, but the caterpillars would die. They couldn't eat the milkweed because of the defenses that the milkweed has developed in order to protect itself from caterpillars. But there's been a kind of an arms race between the milkweeds and the monarch butterflies and just a couple of other butterflies that can feed their larvae on the leaves. Gradually, the leaves developed the toxins and the latex, which makes it inedible to most insects. But the insects, most of them just gave up, but the monarchs kept evolving the ability to make use of those leaves. And so as the leaves got more and more toxic to most butterflies, that is to the caterpillars, the larvae of the butterflies, the monarchs stayed with them. And so we now have monarchs that are completely dependent on the milkweeds, but not just common milkweeds. They also can feed on other milkweeds like the butterfly milkweed. These butterflies that you see feeding on nectar are the pearl crescents. I think we got 3 pearl crescents on this butterfly milkweed. But if you look closely in the middle of the flower, you'll see that there's a caterpillar. Oh, I got to show with the cursor. See that? Can you see the cursor? There's the caterpillar. And that is a monarch butterfly's caterpillar, which will eat the leaves, and it can also eat the flowers. Now, of course, the other butterflies aren't eating the flowers. They're simply stealing the nectar from the flowers, but the caterpillar can eat the flowers. And sometimes the caterpillars, if you get some monarch butterfly caterpillars, they'll eat the whole flower head off of the plant. And when I see that, I go, oh, they've eaten the whole bud off of the plant. Good for them. The plant did a good job, because we want monarch butterflies. Another milkweed, which is very common in Iowa, is the swamp milkweed. It's called swamp because it likes to be in a more wet place. It grows in wetlands. First ones that I ever saw were in wetlands, but I found them in fairly dry places too. Again, they are a good source of forage for the caterpillars of the monarch, but they're also wonderful nectar sources for other butterflies and other kinds of insects, wasps, bees, and all kinds of stuff. Here we have the partridge pea. This is one of my favorite. I kind of got interested in these. I'm going to try something, and you have to tell me if you can hear the bumblebee. Can you hear the bumblebee?
I'm not quite hearing it.
Okay, I didn't know if the sound would work. The interesting thing about bumblebees is that they have basically 2 ways of making a buzzing sound. One is the bzzz, that's their flying sound, but then they also do this thing which this guy is doing right now, or this lady is doing right now, which they buzz faster. And that fast buzz shakes the pollen right out of the off of the stamens of the flower. So they're going buzz, 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 and if I had been around bumblebees all my life, I think, and never realized that there were two different pitches. Or if I heard it, I thought maybe it was a fly or something else. But when I finally got onto it, I realized that it's just the bumblebee doing that buzz pollination. Now, buzz pollination is a really important thing. Many, many plants don't give up much of their pollen unless a bee, or I think only bees have the ability to do this. Excuse me. Bumblebees can do it, but honeybees can't. Of course, honeybees are not native to Iowa, but the bumblebees are. And so there's some other flowers that need buzz pollination too, like tomato blossoms, for example, and places where they're growing tomatoes with bees being excluded, then they have to go to terrible efforts to try and get them pollinated. So it's kind of a wonderful thing for me. It was a wonderful thing to realize that all this was going on that I didn't even know was there. Here's another thing. Oh, and by the way, partridge peas are such a cool thing to grow. I mean, I've really just woke up to the whole joy of gardening since I found out that we've got hundreds of kinds of wonderful wildflowers, which are every bit as lovely in the garden. There's really, in my mind, there's just no excuse for, now I'm going to hurt somebody's feelings, but there's really no reason to grow zinnias, because there are so many native flowers that feed all of our insects that are the basis of what the birds need. And so, and they're just as pretty. I mean, there's really nothing prettier than the gold of this partridge pea. Now here's a partridge pea that's not in bloom yet. If you can see my cursor, here's a bud that's about to form. Here's another bud, and you notice these ants all over it, all over it. And if you look even closer, can you see this little bump on the leaf here? Can you see that, anyone?
Yes.
All right. So this looks like a little bowl, a little cup. And it is indeed a little cup. It's a nectary, and it produces drops of nectar, which the ants collect. They're really not interested in nectar in the flower of the partridge pea. This is a special adaptation of the partridge pea to get ants to patrol the plants all the time. The ants are always running around on these leaves before the flowers open, and that's discouraging other things that might want to eat that plant. But it turns out to be good food for the ants, and it's protection for the plant. So I got really interested in what was going on with that little nectary, and I brought one in the house and put it under my microscope. And there's the nectary. Now I'm going to go back to the previous one. Here's the little nectary, and here's some ants coming. Here's an ant on one. You can't really quite see it. And here's the nectary. So I put that under my microscope and I looked at it, and it didn't have this bubble on it at first. It was just flat across the top. And as I watched it, it began to form these little bubbles and the one bigger bubble in the middle. So of course I had to taste it, and it was sweet. So this plant is constantly, slowly oozing the nectar in order to get the ants to run around all the time. If it just made a nice big gush, the ants would just park there. But an ant comes up, and once I saw this, then I started watching the plants again. You see an ant running around. It runs up to one of these nectaries. It puts its little face in. It has a little nice slurp, and then it runs off. I couldn't see the bubble when I'm looking at this scale, but it runs off looking for the next one. Meanwhile, the nectary starts to make another little pile of nectar, and another plant finds it. The result of it is that the ants are constantly moving around on the plant. I think it was really quite clever of the plant to think up this program for protection. All right. If you haven't read Doug Tallamy's book, Bringing Nature Home, please order it on Amazon tomorrow or get it from your library. This is really the book that opened my eyes to the importance, to the full role of native plants in sustaining our entire ecosystem. So just, I can't talk to anybody about plants without plugging this book. You got to read this book. I'm sure probably everybody on here has read it, but if there's one person who hasn't, please go read it. Bringing Nature Home, Doug Tallamy. Best book I ever read. All right. Now, about birds needing the natives. This is just I don't know if this wren down here really wants to eat these plants, but the wren does like to eat bugs. He probably doesn't eat the plant at all. But if you look closely, you'll see there are some insects flying around, and the wren will catch those insects. And if there are caterpillars, the wren will definitely catch those caterpillars. It needs a lot of caterpillars because it's got babies to feed and they need a lot of food. And the only thing that their babies eat is caterpillars. Really, they may eat a few spiders. They do not eat birdseed. Baby birds do not eat sunflower seeds. They need insect food and spider food. And that's what we need the native plants in order to produce. Now, some plants that are native plants directly produce food for the birds, like the black cherry. The berries on this, the black cherries, I guess they're cherries, not berries, they look very much like the berries that you see on the wild honeysuckle. But chemically, they're quite different, and they're much more nourishing and better for birds who need to fatten up before they migrate. So you want it's much better to have native fruits than to have this honeysuckle. I've heard some people say, "Oh, don't hurt the honeysuckle. The birds eat the berries." Yeah, but they're not very good food, and no caterpillars here at all eat the honeysuckle plant leaves. So notice if you look here, these leaves are all chewed up. See how chewed up they are? Look at all these places where somebody has taken a bite. Little holes, nooks. I mean, they're chewed all to pieces, and yet they don't look bad. When you walk by a cherry tree, you don't go, "Oh, look, I see that leaves." It doesn't hurt the looks of your garden, but it means that whole tree is food for birds. Another instance of birds directly eating the plants is the Virginia creeper. Here we have a Swainson's thrush, probably on migration here because they don't nest. Maybe they do someplace in Iowa, but in southeast Iowa, they certainly don't nest. But they do catch these berries off of the Virginia creeper. I've heard people complain about Virginia creepers. "Oh, they climb up the wall, it leaves a stain." Okay, you can just pull it off the wall very easily. They look a little bit like poison ivy when they're close to the ground, but they're not. And I have heard that somebody is allergic to them, but they don't give you a rash like poison ivy does. But the birds do love them. Birds also like the poison ivy berries, but the Virginia creeper berries are not harmful to anybody in any way, and they're really great for the birds. Prairie blazing star is one of my favorite wildflowers. It's just it's so cool because it starts to bloom at the top and then it kind of goes down the stalk as it blooms. So it's like a giant incense stick. So here we have a hummingbird after the nectar. This is a bird taking nectar. Most birds don't go for nectar, but I'm showing you some plants in which the bird actually directly eats what the plant produces. Another plant like that is the wild columbine, one of our earliest spring blooming flowers. Here, where we are in Fairfield, it amazes me every year the wild columbine comes into bloom within 3 days of the time that I see the first hummingbird. They're timed for each other. They evolved together. Now, this hummingbird's bill is not very long. It only comes about this far, but then the hummingbird's tongue comes all the way up to this very tip up here where there's a little reservoir of nectar up there. So this hummingbird is getting fed. And the bird's bill and the shape of the flower perfectly fit each other to feed each other. And the hummingbird is also pollinating this flower at the same time. Here's another wildflower that the hummingbirds use strongly, and that's the cardinal flower. So here the hummingbird is about to stick its beak down into one of these flowers. Let's look at this flower right here. When the bill of this bird goes down into this flower, then this little tip right here, which is the reproductive column of the flower, that little tip is going to bop that bird right on its head and leave a little speck of pollen. And then the next bird that comes along, or actually, let's say that a couple of days later, when this plant has reached the stage of its life, or that flower has reached the stage of its life when it's ready to receive pollen, another hummingbird comes along who has some pollen on the top of its head, and it gets bopped, but now that reproductive column has a little sticky thing at the end, and the stigma, and it picks up the pollen, and bingo, the flower is pollinated. So the pollination of the flower and the feeding of the hummingbird go hand in hand. But there's something else in this picture that I find particularly interesting, and that's this plant hopper, which looks like a moth, but it's not a moth. It's a little plant-sucking insect. And many birds, small birds that need to feed their babies, usually they're getting caterpillars, but sometimes they get small moths and they get plant hoppers. So this little plant hopper, hummingbird won't eat it, but something else is going to eat it. Maybe a chickadee, maybe I don't know, a blue-gray gnatcatcher or something might very well catch that plant hopper, and it'll become food for the babies. Eastern bluebirds feed their young entirely on insects and spiders. They're completely dependent on having those things grow, having those animals, those microscopic animals growing on native plants. And here we have a bluebird who has got a hole in that tree, and he's been going in and out feeding his babies. I just think it's absolutely wonderful. And I am sorry, no zinnia will take the place of that for me. So we did have some baby bluebirds that hatched out in our backyard, and Michael and I were having breakfast out, and the last one to hatch, I mean to leave the nest, not to hatch, but the last one to leave the nest came hopping, he fledged, he came hopping across the grass, working his way like 50 feet across the grass. And I think he liked Michael's blue shirt, or he just saw something in Michael that he liked. He climbed up Michael's jeans, got up onto his shoulder, and perched there. And I was sitting next to Michael with my camera, with my long lens in my pocket, I mean, in my hands. And I didn't want to scare the bird. I couldn't focus because it was too close. And so I was leaning back until I almost fell over backwards in the chair. And I just could get the bird in focus, but not Michael's face. But that's okay, because the bird is really what counts here. That was one of my favorite experiences with the bluebirds nesting.
It's Michael's favorite picture of himself.
Yeah, Michael's favorite picture of himself too. He was pretty pleased, but I really think I get the credit because I took the picture. Another bird that feeds insects to its young is the eastern phoebe. And we did have a family of eastern phoebes make a nest in the eaves of our house. Here they are. Aren't they cute? And they notice all the moss that's mixed in with this nest material. And moss, of course, is another native plant that is very, very important to the ecology, but not so much for growing insects. Most mosses are not eaten by insects, but it's an extremely important building material for birds. So these 4 baby eastern phoebes are just about to fledge. And the 2 parents are just bringing food to them constantly. And here's one that, this is an adult eastern phoebe who has found a praying mantid nymph out in the grassy field and is bringing it to the nest. And it was back and forth and back and forth. Feed the baby, go back, get another mantid. And so I sent a picture of this. I sent this picture to my entomologist friend, Moni Hain, and said, can you tell me what kind of praying mantis this is? And she said, that is not a praying mantis. That is a praying mantid, because mantis is a particular genus of insects. And the ones that we have here are mantid, not mantis. So I said, all right, I got it. But if you Google it, you'll find it under mantis also. This is not the adult, which is why it's so small. It doesn't have any wings, but there must have been a gajillion of them in that field. And that day, those birds were constantly hauling them to the baby birds. What if we had just mowed? You know, there wouldn't have been any mantids there. And I'm really glad those babies all flew away, which they did. Well, another one of my favorite wildflowers is the gray-headed coneflower. And this is another flower. Well, of course, it does make seeds, and a lot of the birds eat the seeds. But this one is kind of neat because goldfinches actually eat the petals. And they just chow them down. It turns out that yellow is a color that is not produced in the body of the bird. They actually get it. They collect that pigment from the plant. So when this bird eats this petal, it's collecting its yellow, which it will then use in spring to grow yellow flowers. Oh, mygaia.substack.com. That's my blog. If you like to see these kind of things, you go there. I put stuff up like this every week. All right. So native flowers, native wildflowers in the garden, just a couple of things. How are we doing on time? Do I have time to do a few flowers here?
Yes,
Okay. All right.
please.
All right. So rosinweed is another nice native flower that is very, very popular with the insects. This is kind of nice because you can see the pollen-bearing elements coming out of this structure, coming out of this plant, as well as the big petals on the outside. This is a composite plant, which means that each one of these petals is really just one petal of a tiny little flower. All the ones around the edge have one big petal, and the rest, it's kind of like those crabs that have one huge claw. So it's a tiny little flower with one big petal, and all the flowers together make up this flower head. And in the middle, they don't have any big petals. They're just miniature, but they are miniature, tiny little flowers called florets. Very popular with bumblebees. Another flower that I just love is just a wildflower. I've never found an insect on it, but I don't care because I like it so much, and I'm sure somebody must like it. This is the blue-eyed grass. There are several species of blue-eyed grass in Iowa. In most places, what people get is the one that's the campestre subspecies. But here in southeast Iowa, we just get the stout blue-eyed grass, which is angustifolia. And this grows so inconspicuously down in the grass. I'll just see I'll catch a little speck of blue, and I stop and look. Yes, it's blue-eyed grass, and then I mark the spot, and I come back when it's finished blooming, and I pull up one little piece that's the size of my thumb, and when I split it apart, it makes maybe 20 little tiny plants, each one with a tiny root on it. When I plant them out, they each one turn into a big plant. And the leaves, you can see they kind of look like like iris leaves, and in fact they are in the iris family. So I think of them as miniature blue iris. It's just one of my favorite wildflowers. Butterfly milkweed we already did. Asters are just the stuff. Now, I love willow aster because to me, this looks like an elegant lady. And I was so excited when I first learned willow aster. I went, that sounds like the name of a really refined woman. If I ever write a novel, I'm going to use the pen name Willow Aster. And then doggone it, somebody has already gone and taken that. There already is a Willow Aster. I mean, a person who writes romance novels. But anyway, Willow Aster is one of my favorites and just usually has lots and lots of insects on it. The heath aster, if you look at this, it's got tiny little leaves. You see no big leaves on it, tiny little leaves. It's one of the last asters to bloom in the fall. and it makes kind of like mounds of almost like snow, really pretty nice. Venus's looking glass. I found this one day was just growing in the grass. These are microscopic almost. The flowers are so small. And I don't know if you can see any of the seeds. Maybe on this one you can see little black specks. And those are the tiny little seeds. And when they come out, they land in these little bowls. And here you get like 10 or 15 little tiny seeds. It's really hard to catch them. But such fun to have growing in the yard. To me, this is much more interesting than going down to Walmart and buying a 6-pack of whatever they're selling to people to plant in their yards. Why not plant Venus's looking glass? So much more fun. Oh, and we have so many wonderful wild roses.
Those are house.
Yeah, that's our house in the background. This one is I can't remember the common name, if it's prairie but anyway, it's Rosa satigera, and it's supposed to be rare in Iowa, but it's the one that we have all over the place on our property. And the bees go crazy on it. Every spring, about May, when these are in bloom, I'm running down there every single morning to listen to the bees because there it is. I don't know, I get such a kick out of it. And of course, it's food for many insects and flowers. Everybody nectars on it. All kinds of bees like it. Carpenter bees like it too. Really nice wildflower. Spotted jewelweed. They mean the spots on the plant, but it's always got these things on the leaves too. And I don't know what's eating it, but something is having a good time. I'm sure you all have had the fun of picking these seeds when they're just about right. You pick that little pod and it'll just spring open. It's such fun to have it pop and then spray the seeds around. This is something that's quite ephemeral. It'll grow in a place that's damp, and you may have just a mass of it, and the next year none, and then they'll grow someplace else. But you want to be able to let this stuff go and not get too neat about cleaning everything up. And I don't really have anything against zinnias, except that I think it's a waste of life to plant them. The stiff goldenrod is one of my favorite goldenrods. This one, I'm very pleased with this one because I found it myself. It's the first goldenrod I ever identified. I was driving along the gravel road to our house, and I saw these yellow flowers. I jumped out of the car, ran down in the ditch where they were growing. And this is a really sturdy goldenrod, and it is just covered with butterflies in the late summer. Sorry, I don't have a butterfly on it right now. And my favorite of all the milkweeds is the purple milkweed. This one just coming into bloom. Quite rare in Iowa, but I was quite thrilled to find them. I'd been trying for years to find them. I'd even tried to buy seeds, and then I found a stand of them on our own property, and I've been growing out the seeds ever since. If anybody's just desperate to have some, I'll be happy to share some seeds with you. And now, are we out of time? 8:20. We want to just quick run through the birds here.
Yes, please.
Some birds that need insects. The eastern meadowlark, which needs the insects that grow in the grass. The eastern wood pewee, living on a branch that's all lichen of various kinds. This is one of those birds that entirely lives on flying insects, and it cannot raise its young or even live itself without them. The ruby-crowned kinglet. This is something that would have eaten that little plant hopper. The blue-gray gnatcatcher. Oh, this is my favorite. This little guy who she decorates her nest with the lichen. Such a cute little bird. The cardinal and the downy woodpecker. The cardinal eats seeds as an adult, but when it's feeding babies, it's got to feed them insects. So it needs those wild plants. And the golden-crowned kinglet, who I always thought was a bird that had a nice yellow head until I discovered the golden slippers and realized that the legs At least the feet are gold also. Another insect eater. And the yellow-rumped warbler, which comes through in the spring, again, cannot have yellow-rumped warblers. And this one, because it's a migrant, it's going to come through. It's got to get insects in order to continue its migration because it doesn't nest here, but it has to have the insects in order to complete its migration and to live. The Blackburnian warbler, the Baltimore oriole, and now we're not going to keep doing this here. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop there. If anybody has any questions, we'll
Yes, so there are some questions in the chat. And you did kind of mention, Judy was wondering if you collect the seeds to grow more plants, or do you just rely on them self-seeding?
Oh, I collect them big time, big time. This year I did fewer than usual, but I did collect over 50 species of wildflower seeds on my property this year. I collect them in the fall, I clean them, I catalog them, I cold stratify them, I plant them out in special growing boxes, I plant them out in the fields, I give the seeds to friends, I give plants to friends. I preach this gospel every place. People, when they see me coming, they go, am I going to have to take plants home? No, they don't really. They're glad to get them. But yes, I do collect seeds. It's kind of what I do. Are we done?
Who
I'm,
took these pictures?
I'm sorry, I was muted. So yeah, your photos are beautiful. In the chat, Angie suggested that maybe we should have a future native plant swap. She's got lots of oxeye, she says. But yeah, people have commented how beautiful your photos are, and they're curious. Connie is curious what you use to capture your images and to describe the brand of microscope you use.
Okay, well, I have a Canon R5 camera with a 100 to 400 millimeter lens, which is not particularly huge. A lot of people have bigger lenses, but it's the biggest one I'm willing to carry around. And the plants are sometimes, yeah, I also have a macro lens that I use sometimes for plants. And what was the other thing you asked?
The
Oh, the
brand of
microscope. The
microscope.
microscope. It's a Leica,
Dissecting microscope.
yeah, dissecting microscope. So you look through both eyes at the same time. You put a card in it and you can record the pictures, but they're very narrow field of view. So I usually take a series of pictures that, I just keep changing the focus and I'll get maybe 10 or 15 pictures. And then in Photoshop, I do photo stacking and get a picture so that it's all in focus. Otherwise, it would be very frustrating. I love my microscope. It's my favorite toy.
It was so interesting to learn about those nectarine things on partridge pea. Fascinating. So, Connie also shared that Hartman Reserve is planning to have their native plant sale again in May and September. Sometimes our Audubon group actually helps at that event. So keep that in mind, everybody. Another question is, John asks, do you have recommendations for novices to identify wildflowers?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's a marvelous app for your phone. It's called Picture This. Picture, no space, this. I think you have to pay $30 a year for it. Well worth it. I use it every single day because, and it's not always right, but it's most of the time right. And so when I see something coming up and I'm going, is this a weed or is this something that I planted? I'm not sure. And I just hold it up to my, put my phone on it and it'll say, oh, that's a partridge pea. Okay, all right, I'm keeping it. So I find it very, very useful. And even when it's wrong, it's often pretty close. So it may not have the species, but it may at least get you started so that you can then look farther. But I would say that 85% of the time it nails it. It's not very good at moss and it's only so-so at trees, but it's really great at flowers. And it does amazingly well when all you have is leaves too.
That's a great suggestion. And Connie said that she loves that app as well. I might suggest the iNaturalist app along with their Seek app. That's what I use when I'm out hiking around. And again, they're only as good as identifying, based on the database that they're hitting. So that's, I think, one application for AI that I have really benefited from is those apps that help me identify by comparing the pictures that I have against their databases.
Right. Good. Yeah, that's good. I've tried to use iNaturalist, and I sometimes find it more difficult because then they want me to. I don't know. I think I probably just haven't learned to use it yet, and I'm lazy.
Anybody have other questions? You can certainly unmute yourself, keep them in the chat if you'd like, but yeah, other questions for Diane or Michael?
Want to come back in, Michael?
Do a non-screen share.
Oh, how do I do that? I'll stop sharing. I don't know how to stop sharing, Michael. Stop share, there it is.
There we go.
All right.
And you can close.
Well, I don't see any other questions in the chat.
Okay.
But this was a wonderful program. Thank you so much. And learned a lot, as we always do. And it's such fun to, talk with like-minded people. Your voice and excitement when you're talking about optics and, what you discover about the pollination and your garden and stuff is the same excitement that people can hear in my voice when I talk about anything. And I secretly wish you had included the turtles. So I'm going to have to look at your blog to look at your pictures of turtles because those are
Want to talk
super
about
cute.
the homegrown national?
Homegrown National Park. Why don't you talk about?
I don't.
national-
You're the better.
Okay, no, I'm not going to try and do Homegrown National Park, but there is Homegrown National Park, in which Doug Tallamy, whose book I was plugging there, has got this thing where you can. His point is that there's more backyard space than there is national park in our country. And there isn't room to grow enough native plants in public lands to save our insects and our birds. But in our backyards, there is room. So he's trying to encourage people to grow even one plant in their backyard, or reduce their lawn a little bit and get some, start growing a few more wild things. But I have to warn you, if you start doing it kind of grows on you, because it's so exciting to discover a wild plant, and then, to me, to discover the wild plant, mark it, come back when it's in seed, save the seed, and then grow it out, and then watch it bloom, and then watch animals use it is quite marvelous. So you can join Backyard National Park and get your space, however large or small, on the map and be part of that movement. It's a cool thing. I do it.
Oh, that is really interesting. I had not known of that. And I know that there's a lot of us who have heard Doug Tallamy, who are fans of him
Yeah.
as well. So
He
very
rocks.
good.
He totally rocks.
Indeed, indeed. So, well, is there anything else that people have to share? Well, I'll just share a little bit more about that meteor that I saw last night. It was so cool because it was twilight. It was still daylight, basically. And I was just happened to be looking in that part of the sky, and it was blue, and it was like a fireball, and it had a long tail, and it kind of originated in the area of where the coordinates meteors might be, and it was spectacular. And I emailed David Voits and told him about it, and he said that it's really pretty rare to see meteors during the day. So I felt especially blessed. And I've also been enjoying the dark sky here in Wyoming, and we had northern lights on New Year's Eve, which were spectacular. Lots of reds. And then also what I learned from David, and it's my favorite nighttime object in the sky, is the beehive cluster. If I can find the constellation Leo, I can find the beehive cluster, and it's been near Mars. So I was sharing with David just how much fun I've been enjoying the skies here in Wyoming. So, all right. Anything else for the good of the order?
Should I interrupt now?
Sure, Craig.
Yeah, I should say, thanks Candace for being a presenter and sharing your observations, and the porters. We, many of us have purchased items through them. Chris and I have a Swarovski spotting scope and tripod. We're just very pleased with their service, and we're pleased that we can make that statement. So oftentimes,
Thank you.
Well,
time,
when we decided to start a business, we said, if we're gonna do anything, we want to have it, move the world to a more sustainable planet.
Yeah.
And so that's been our whole goal all along.
they are good mentors for Chris and I and for our organization. Next month now, Laura will be talking to us from the Tall Grass Prairies. And I hope that you folks out there have an opportunity to go out and go for a walkabout in the early evening, like I said, and much like what Candace saw last night. You're bound to find a critter or a plant or something out there. That one thing that I think we fail to do as birders is to stop and just observe that particular phenomenon for a long period of time and just get to know what you're looking at, rather than trying to count how many species we see, or which is what oftentimes we do when we're going birding. Just take the time to sit back and enjoy the sound or the smells, the scent of what you're looking at. And with that, I have nothing more to add. Thanks for coming.
A great way to end. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Oh, I should say hi, Tom, if you're out there.
All right. Thanks everybody.
See you next month.